Hello everyone, welcome to the Butterfield Alpacas and Fiber Arts podcast. This is episode 7. I am Tashia Butterfield, alpaca rancher, crochet instructor, knitter, newbie spinner, and a lover of all things alpaca. On social media you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Ravelry, and Facebook. There's also a Ravelry group for this podcast, and a link for that will be down in the show notes in the description box. Coming up in this episode, I am going to reveal the winner of our giveaway. Yes, we have reached 300 subscribers, and I will tell you who the winner is, as well as details about our upcoming KAL that begins June 1st. And to help out with preparing for the KAL, in this episode, I'm talking about what makes alpaca fiber special. What is the big deal about it? I'm going to give you what you need to know to make good decisions on projects to use with your alpaca yarn. Then we're going to go out to the ranch and you're going to see what Herd Health Day is for me. I do this every month. I'm also going to take you to the Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle yarn shop in Nebraska. The owner of that shop is Kelsey Patton, who organized the Mid-Plains Fiber Fair that I told you about a few weeks back. And this was the first year in which that fiber fair took place, and I think it was just an awesome success. And a lot of people are so excited that we have a fair here in the middle of our state, including myself. So we're going to go to her store and talk about what it's like to have a store and all those different types of things. She has a very interesting story that I think a number of you will find very fascinating. Then we're going to wrap up with TV strings and things. I'm going to show you some of my acquisitions from Kelsey's store, as well as some of my works in progress. And before we get to all of that, I want to tell you about the giveaway because we have a winner. It was kind of nail biting this week because we were so close. By the time episode 6 got published, we were so close. And most people watch my podcast during the week rather than the weekend. So the weekend came and it was slowly growing in subscribers. And there was like one whole day where I was 2 subscribers away from our goal of 300. It sat at 298 for an entire day. And it was just, it was so hard to wait. But no. Just yesterday, it went from 298 to 305. By the time I looked between, 2 times, the next time I looked, it was at 305. And I was like, what? Wow. Okay. So anyway, so we have a winner, and that is Rosalba Bassora. I think I'm saying her name right. I hope so, Rosalba. I hope so. I've already contacted her, and so she has selected her yarn. And I will be sending that out to her tomorrow, and she will have it in time to use it if she wants for our upcoming Alpaca KAL, which starts June 1st. And so let's talk about the Alpaca KAL a little bit. There's only 2 rules for this KAL, and KAL is both knitting and crocheting. You can do either one. However you want to use your yarn is just fine by me. The 2 rules. Number 1, the yarn that you use must be at least 70% alpaca. It's an Alpaca KAL, so most of it should be alpaca. The remaining 30% can be anything you want. And the second rule is going to be you can only enter in 1 item. And some of you have asked me if a work in progress would qualify for this KAL. Especially since some of you newly started a project that you'd like to enter into the KAL, and if it would be all right. And I'm going to say yes on one condition. The purpose of this KAL is to help you make wise decisions with your alpaca yarn so that the final product that you make is something that you really enjoy. There's a lot of missteps that you can make when choosing a project for your alpaca yarn. And in just a moment, we're going to go into detail about how you can avoid all that. But if after you learn about alpaca fiber today, if you feel that the project you have chosen fits the yarn that you are using, then I say yes, you can enter it in. remembering that you can only enter in one product, so that's going to be your one item, that's fine by me. If after today you realize that what you chose to make with your alpaca yarn is not really a good idea, you might just end up frogging it anyway. So yeah. All right, well, let's talk about alpaca fiber, shall we? When we talk about alpaca fiber, what we're really referring to are the secondary follicles that grow around a primary follicle. You can see on the left that there's a primary in the middle surrounded by secondaries. Naturally, the more secondaries there are crowding into a small space, the more fine each of those fibers need to be in order to exist together. So you can see that there's a low density grouping and a high density grouping. And in those high density groupings is where we get the really fine fiber. The primary fiber is often called a guard hair. It's stiff, straight, and hollow. The purpose of this primary fiber is to guard those secondary fibers. So it keeps damage from grass, twigs, and things like that from affecting those secondary fibers. And when we are skirting a fleece and we're going through it, if the primary fibers are significantly thicker than the secondary fibers, we call that a hairy fleece. In most cases, alpaca fleeces should be de-haired. You can go back to our visit to the shepherd's mill and see what a de-hairer machine looks like and how it works. But in most cases, we're going to be removing those primaries because they are going to make a better end product. For fleeces which have not been de-haired and should have been, that's going to be pretty obvious in the end product because those fibers are going to poke out of the yarn, and since they're thicker, they're going to give you a prickly factor when they're next to your skin. So even though those secondary fibers may be beautiful and fine, if those primaries were left in and they're significantly thicker, then you are going to feel it on your skin. Here in the middle, you see examples of the two breeds of alpaca. What makes these breeds different is the fiber in which they grow. The actual body of the animal and everything internally is the same. The fiber they grow is what makes them different. On top is the wakaya fleece, and it's much more wool-like. It can have crimp like is shown in this picture. And then there's also the Suri, the picture on the bottom, which is more silky, long, and you can think of them more like silk because that's what they look like and it's what they feel like. There's two differences in these types of fleece. One is the outside of the fiber and one is the inside. The inside of a follicle, a fiber, there's two parts that make up the center, and the diagram on the right shows you what it looks like in a wakaya follicle. So you have the two parts, paracortex and the orthocortex, and you can see that there's a distinction between the two. Well, because of that distinction and how each of those cortexes behave, that's what makes the crimp. However, on the Suri, even though it has both the paracortex and the orthocortex, they're all kind of mixed together and they're not distinct, making no crimp in the Suri, and so it just is very limp, if you will. The crimp in fiber is what gives what we call memory, the bounce back factor. On the right side, we see a wool fleece, and you can tell there's a lot of crimp in that. Wool has a definite bounce back factor, and it is something that we blend with alpaca to give it more memory. Overall, alpaca fiber does not have memory. It's beautiful for draping, but there's no memory in it. And you can see on the left, there is a wakaya fleece there with high crimp. And so I can only speak for the US alpacas, but at least in the US, crimp is a quality that we are breeding for. So what you see on the left is a result of intentional breeding for an intentional result within the US. Now in that center picture, you can see that there can be a range of crimpiness in a wakaya fleece. So that white sample in the center picture, it's not really crimpy, it's more wavy. And then the other samples, get progressively more crimpy. So there can be quite a range of crimpiness in Wakaya fleeces. Not all of them are going to be super crimpy like the picture on the left. And in my herd, I certainly have a range of waviness and crimpiness. And in fact, I have some that have no crimp at all. And since crimp is what gives fiber that memory, the bounce back factor, if it's not there, obviously there's no memory. So when you are buying a commercial alpaca yarn, you don't know how crimpy the fleece was that was used to make that yarn. So in general, you just need to assume that 100% alpaca does not have any memory. And if you want memory, it must be blended with something like wool that has that memory. If you're wanting to use 100% alpaca and you would like to have some memory, you're going to have to go to an actual alpaca farm or ranch where you can see the animal, you can see the original fleece, and you know that the crimp is there. So just know if you go to a store, any type of store, and you randomly buy alpaca yarn, it's likely to not have very much crimp, so don't expect it to have memory. All right, let's go back to this first picture. Another difference between the Wakaya and the Suri fleece is going to be the outside of it. And take a look on the left side of the picture here. We're talking about what people often refer to as scales. Wool has a lot of scales. That's what makes wool really grip. The fibers grip to each other, and also makes it something that felts very easily. And usually wool fiber has 0.8 micron height in those scales, whereas the Wakaya, now this image shows 0.2 to 0.35. I've also read where it's 0.4 microns, so it's at least half, possibly more than half, as small in scales as the wool. So there are some scales there, but you're not going to feel it nearly much as wool. And what that means is if you had two fleeces next to each other, a wool one and a Wakaya alpaca one, and they are the same micron, they measure to be the same, but by the feel, the Wakaya is going to feel much more soft and smooth because of that scaliness or lack of scales in the Wakaya fleece. Whereas the Suri alpaca, those scales are even less. They're almost non-existent. And again, that gives it the very silky, shimmery look. But you can see in the picture, it says 0 to 0.08 micron. And in the close-up circles there, you can tell the difference that if you were to feel a Suri alpaca fleece, it's like butter. It's gonna feel like silk. This is another picture that shows you those scales. So on the left we have the coarse wool, then the fine wool, which the fine wool is usually the type of thing that alpaca is going to be blended with, like merino. And then we have the alpaca, and this one is the Wakaya alpaca. So you can see there what those scales look like, and also some other examples. So now that you understand a bit of the structure about the fiber, let's talk more about the qualities of the fiber itself. Something you'll notice right away about alpaca yarn is that it's going to be very warm. Studies have been done that show alpaca yarn to be 3 times warmer than wool. And they gave this example that if you were to be put in a 0-degree Fahrenheit environment and you were wearing alpaca, you would be given a 50-degree Fahrenheit comfort range. Whereas if you wore wool, that gives you a 30-degree Fahrenheit comfort range in the same environment. So it's obvious that alpaca is going to keep you warmer. Alpaca is also very strong. The average tensile strength of alpaca is 50 newtons per kilotex. And you can go Google that to see what that really means. But when it comes to the modern mill machinery that is going to be making our yarn, fiber needs to be at least 30 newtons per kilotex. And wool is about 35 to 40 newtons per kilotex, depending on which breed you're talking about. But there's also other sources that say alpaca is the strongest mammal fiber out there. So you're not going to have to worry about any tension being on whatever item that you're making and it breaking or ripping or something like that. It is very, very strong. Alpaca fiber is also water repellent naturally. We haven't done anything to it to make it this way. It just naturally is. It's hard to even do water repellent testing on them because it is so water repellent. Due to this extreme water resistance, it may be part of the reason that alpaca is so successful at wicking away moisture from the body. And if you've ever worn alpaca socks, you will know they're about the best thing you could ever put on your feet. Wear them year round because even in the summer, it's wicking that moisture away and you're going to feel much, much cooler. And obviously in the winter, wicking moisture away means that the sweat of your feet is not going to make you colder because your feet are wet. So you might consider making socks for this cow because you would honestly love them. Due to the water repellent quality is also a reason why your alpaca socks are not very likely to stink. Many of the reasons that alpaca fiber is water repellent also makes it stain resistant. I have an alpaca rug in front of my kitchen sink that has been there for almost 5 years. It looks nearly new, like the day that I got it. It has survived cats, 3 litters of kittens. I have 3 cats living with me now, but stuff gets on it, especially at the sink, and you'd never know that a cat threw up on it or something like that. It does not stain at all. So you're not going to have to worry about spilling wine on your shawl or something because that's going to come right out. One of the most interesting qualities about alpaca, at least for me, is that it is fire retardant. In fact, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission has categorized alpaca as a Class 1 fiber, meaning you can use it for drapes and furniture and that type of thing because it actually self-extinguishes. If you were to put I haven't tried this, but if you were to put a flame up to it, alpaca is not going to catch on fire. So I suppose that's going to give you a little more comfort if you're wearing something that's not actually going to catch on fire and melt on you. Alpaca fiber is very durable, and what this means is that it is a low pilling fiber. It also has a score of 15,000 cycles of abrasion, which meets upholstery standards. Like I said before, between being fire retardant and this able to handle a lot of abrasion, makes it durable. It's great for furniture. And I have been told that people who have had an alpaca sweater for 30 years or 40 years are still wearing it because it looks virtually the same as the day that they got it. Alpaca naturally comes in a wide range of colors, and depending on where you are in the world, the number of colors that are acceptable are going to be different. In the US, we have 16 official colors, and in a future podcast, I'll go into that because I have most of those colors in my herd. But this means that if you are not interested in fabric that is dyed, alpaca gives you a lot of choices. It also means that those colors are never going to fade or anything like that. But alpaca also accepts dyes very beautifully. So if you like colors that are not the natural ones that alpacas come in, no worries because they accept dyes very, very well. In regards to yarn, you've probably figured out by now that alpaca is going to behave a bit differently. And so I want to read out of this book called The Knitter's Book of Yarn, The Ultimate Guide to Choosing, Using, and Enjoying Yarn. And this is a section specifically about alpacas and using it in knitting or crochet. When choosing a project for an alpaca yarn, you should keep 3 things in mind: touch, drape, and warmth. The fiber averages 18 to 26 microns, which puts it in the same league as cashmere and baby kid mohair. Alpaca has a smooth, dense, and lustrous hand, absorbing dye readily and reflecting it back with brilliance and luster. When knit, alpaca produces a dense, relaxed fabric that drapes beautifully on the body. Alpaca is well suited for garments that will rest directly against the skin, even that of babies. Actual softness can vary somewhat depending on the grade of alpaca used in your yarn. For more delicate, tender, and expensive fibers, look for yarns labeled baby alpaca. The softest fibers of all, royal alpaca, are normally reserved for the fashion mills, but you can occasionally find them in hand knitting yarns. In plain stockinette, the smooth alpaca fibers can reveal even the slightest irregularities in your stitches. For this reason, alpaca can benefit from patterns that incorporate some stitch work, such as moss or seed stitch. But keep in mind that cables and heavier stitch work should be added prudently because they increase the overall weight of the garment. Some weight is good for drape, but alpaca is already a dense fiber, so too much drape can be uncomfortable to wear and quickly put things out of shape. For the same reason, any kind of ribbing in pure alpaca will be decorative only. The yarn won't reliably keep your fabric snug. If cables and ribbing are your thing, that's okay too. Just stick with a yarn that blends alpaca with a loftier, more elastic fiber such as wool. And finally, remember the warmth factor. Although not as warm as cashmere, alpaca fiber has a hollow core that helps it hold in heat, making it several times warmer than wool. While there's no law stating that you can't knit a sweater out of bulky alpaca, just remember it's going to be warm, dense, and potentially heavy. And there is an example in this book of a sweater made out of alpaca. So let me show you that. Don't want to reveal the pattern there. You have to go buy the book. You should buy the book. You really should. There's a lot of information in here. If you don't want to buy the book, the author, if I remember her name, the author is Clara Parks, and she does have a class on Craftsy, all about yarn. It's called Know Your Yarn. Choose the perfect yarn every time. And I've went through most of that class, and it's amazing. It's amazing. All the knowledge that she teaches, everything that she knows, and if ever you had a question about how to choose yarn and what different fiber types do, both natural and synthetic, plant-based, protein-based, which is, you know, the animal fibers and all that, you want to go take that class because seriously, this woman knows a lot of stuff. Okay, so now that you've heard all of that, let's talk about how you actually choose a project. Now, some of you have already told me that you have 100% alpaca yarn, which is great, but you must know that 100% alpaca does limit what you can make. The alpaca fiber is very drapey. You know, it's very light, it's very warm, but it doesn't have a lot of memory. Anything you make with it should be made to drape, like a shawl or a scarf. If you make a hat out of 100% alpaca, it's going to stretch. You're going to have a very slouchy hat. If you make a sweater out of 100% alpaca, then you might start off with the sweater in the morning and end up with the dress by the time you get home. It's just going to stretch and stretch and stretch. So if you're wanting to use alpaca with things that do need to keep their shape, then you want to incorporate other fibers like wool. And this is why I've allowed 30% other fibers in your yarn choice, because then you can make hats and sweaters and even socks. A number of episodes ago, I showed you some alpaca socks I was in the process of making, because alpaca is awesome for socks. If ever you're in the store and you see alpaca socks available, don't balk at the price, get them. You will not be sorry. But in this KAL, maybe you want to make alpaca socks. Make sure you have some wool in there and of course some nylon, but to qualify for the KAL, it still needs to be 70% alpaca. So hopefully you can find something in there that will work with that. So where should you actually buy alpaca yarn? First recommendation I'm going to give you is go to a local alpaca farm or ranch. If there's one around you, go visit them. Chances are they have a store and they have yarn made from their animal's fiber. And the benefit of actually going there and seeing them in person is that you are probably going to get to meet the animal in which your yarn came from. And that makes working with the yarn even more endearing. But you'll also be able to ask questions of the growers, whatever you want to find out. Maybe they'll even show you some raw fleece from that animal in which you understand maybe more of the structure of the yarn. But if you see the yarn in person, you'll be able to tell if it was dehaired. Like we were talking about earlier, you want those primary fibers removed. You can hold your yarn up to the light, and if you see a lot of fibers sticking out, those are going to be the primaries, and that is going to give you more of a prickly factor. There is a halo effect to alpaca, so don't think the halo is primaries. You'll be able to tell pretty easily a fiber just sticking right out. It's going to work its way out of the yarn, and then it's going to be poking you. So you don't want that. You can ask if they dehair their fiber before it's made into yarn. My second recommendation is to go to a local yarn store, because again, you can ask questions, and you'll also be able to hold the yarn, hold it up to the light, look for any primary sticking out, that kind of thing. Chances are at local yarn stores, the alpaca yarn that they carry is from Peru. And that's processed a bit differently than what is in the US. I'm not going to knock Peru at all. I've certainly used Peruvian alpaca yarn with good results, and I couldn't even have alpacas if it wasn't for the Peruvian alpaca industry, so I'm not going to knock them at all. I'm just going to say what you're going to find coming out of Peru and what you're going to find from American alpaca growers is going to be a bit different. And then thirdly, you can look at online stores, including Etsy. I would say go to Etsy first and look for alpaca growers that have stores on there, like myself. You don't have to buy from me, you can buy from anybody. But again, that would be a way in which you can communicate to the grower and ask questions, and it's a small business that you're supporting rather than a large company. Ultimately, where you buy from and how much you're willing to spend on this yarn is totally up to you. I'm not mandating where you buy from at all. So just find what's best for your situation. I will put a link to my Etsy store down in the description box. If you choose to shop there, you can. I'm not requiring it at all. I won't be offended if you don't do that. I would rather you support your local small businesses with alpaca growers or a local yarn store before you shop on an online store. But hey, it's totally up to you. Now we're going to head on out to the ranch for Herd Health Day. So a couple of weeks ago, I shared with you one of my favorite things to do with the alpacas, and that was watering them down. Well, this is probably my least favorite thing to do, and that is to give shots. It has to be done every month. I live in an area where there's meningeal worm, which is pretty much the worst thing an alpaca can contract. It's something that attacks their nervous system, their central nervous system, and if it's not caught right away, in a matter of days they will be dead. I actually have lost one boy to M-worm, say M-worm for short, and Bruno, who you've met before, has damage, permanent nerve damage in his back legs from M-worm that he contracted last year. And the treatment for that is a bunch of shots. I mean like 20 shots over a few days. And this that you're seeing here is a preventative measure that I do. I give ivermectin shot once a month. It will kill any M-worm larva that is in their gut. Alpacas are a end host for this type of parasite. So I use ivermectin, which is a fast-acting treatment that kills M-worm if it is in the alpacas at this time. And in a couple of days it is eliminated from their system and they're all good. So there's been a lot of research about resistance to treatments, but for this one in particular, this is the best way to go. Ivermectin every 30 days, and we do 1 cc per 70 pounds. So I have to, measure out the amount that I'm giving. But you'll see kind of what we're doing here. I have one of my employees helping out, Linda, and her job is to catch the alpacas. Okay, you see us moving the table there. It was out of range before, and I have all of my stuff on that table, and I'm going to measure out ivermectin into syringes, one for each alpaca. So I do a new needle, a new syringe for each one. And Linda here is going to catch an alpaca. In this case, it's Gus, the llama, the little Gus there. And all you do is you catch a llama or alpaca by the neck. You basically hug them. It doesn't have to be super tight, it just needs to be firm, in which they feel that restriction. So she's hugging him, and I'm giving the injection in the hip in this case. I usually do the shoulder, the hip. I kind of rotate where I'm doing it each month so it's not the same spot all the time. And now she's catching Toy Dancer, and this is going to be a textbook example. Linda's hugging, I'm doing subcutaneously into the hip, which means just underneath the skin. I'm not going into the muscle, which makes it kind of a challenge. Toy Dancer was spitting there, which tells me that I got in. The challenge for me at this time of year is they are in their full fleece. So especially with the wakayas, it's hard. You're having to get past 2 to 4 inches of fiber down to their body and then get the needle just under the skin but not in the muscle. So I've done this quite a bit, and I have much experience now. I'm not as queasy about it as I once was. Now in my mind it's like I've seen what happens if they get sick with M-worm, and I would rather take an hour or 2 out of my month, do the whole herd with 1 shot apiece, in, out. You'll see how quick it can be. She catches, I go in, out, we're done. And this saves them from, just a devastating experience. I never want to lose an alpaca to M-worm, and I never want any of them to go through what Bruno did and then possibly have some permanent nerve damage. So, yeah, this is pretty much what it is. Like I said, it was the hardest thing for me to learn. I'd never given shots to anybody, anything. I'd never been interested in anything medical before. And, yeah. You could see how they respond. They're like, they know something's coming. And this is Jewel. And she will see her spitting. She's like, oh. But that tells me I'm in, as opposed to missing the body. That tells me I'm in. And I'm so grateful I've done it enough now that I'm in and out and it's over. You saw that it was just, in half a minute we were done. And they know too. It's easier to herd them in now than it used to be. They know the routine. Alpacas are very smart and they know routine. And now they are free. And now we get to go water them down. Yeah, that's what I just said. Now we get to go water them down. It was a warm day. And watering them down helps to de-stress them as well. All this humming that you've been hearing is a sign of concern and stress in them. And if one hums, others tend to hum. And when I put them in these stalls, they tend to just be humming the whole time.
Next up, we're going to go visit a yarn shop. Now, I don't know about you, but I love visiting yarn shops. It's like a candy store to me. I have fond memories of sitting in yarn shops in Chicago, surrounded by all the colors and the textures, and I want to make everything, I love perusing the aisles and just imagining what can be made with them. So actually, visiting yarn shops is really kind of a thing that I love to do. So one of the few yarn shops that we have in the state of Nebraska is Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle in Stromsburg. And as I told you earlier, the owner of this shop was also the coordinator for the Mid-Plains Fiber Fair that happened a few weeks back. And Kelsey has been a fiber artist since she was little. Like, she's one of those people that knew what she wanted to do with her life very early on. And so she has a lot of experience and is very knowledgeable. And she has a very interesting story. So let's head on over to the store.
Okay, so Kelsey, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, my name is Kelsey Patton, and I have lived here in Stromsburg almost all of my life, except for the first 2 years that I was married to my husband, Philip. And I have a yarn shop called Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle, which just celebrated its 6th birthday. So, I've been selling yarn for quite a while, and teaching people how to knit, teaching people how to spin, and I've been a knitter for quite a bit longer than that. I've been knitting since I was 13, when I told my mom that I wanted to knit a sweater, but first we had to get some sheep. And she found someone to teach me how to knit, and my first project was socks. And then we found some sheep. We got Icelandic sheep, and that kind of, the rest is history. We got a spinning wheel, we got a loom. I started doing all the fiber arts that I could get my hands on, and it's just grown from there.
Well, what is it like to own a yarn shop?
It's a lot more work than people think it is. It's a lot of fun. I really, really love it, but there's all the figuring out what your customers actually want, what's actually going to sell, putting things out on the shelves in an attractive manner, figuring out how to arrange things so that it makes sense. And my shop, I have my shop actually divided between the wool yarns and the wool blend yarns and the non-wool yarns, because there are quite a few people out there who are allergic to wool. So the section of my shop, the wall that has the knitting needles, and then the little shelves that face that wall, all of those yarns have no wool in them. They are all llama and alpaca blends, or mohair, silk, linen, cotton, hemp, things like that, so that people who are allergic to wool can come in and browse a section that they know they're not allergic to and enjoy the shopping experience. But then I really deeply love wool, so the majority of the shop is actually wool, but those are still separated. And I have all sorts of sock yarns and hand paints and beautiful hand-dyed things. I really like it.
Now, how much do you get to actually knit, spin, weave, whatever you want to do?
On an average day in the shop, I don't do much of that, actually. There's a lot of tweaking things on my website, tweaking things on my Etsy store, tweaking things in Square, filtering keywords so that my online shoppers can find my stuff and find the right things. I maybe on an average day during my break over the noon hour, I do give myself a break. I'll eat my lunch, I'll do some knitting, and then I'll go back to all of the business side of things. And then there's some days, like especially in the nice weather season, because I do my hand dyeing in my dad's machine shed, I might take a day where I close the shop and I go out and I play with color and I dye yarn and I dye roving that I sell in the shop. And those are really fun days. It's like you're in kindergarten again. You can just put colors together without having to make perfect lines or anything. It's the joy of the colors.
So how far away do your customers tend to come from?
Well, I would say the bulk of my customers come from within a 30-mile radius, the ones that come to my store on a regular weekly basis. I do have customers that are fairly loyal customers that live further west in the state or live in Lincoln and Omaha, and some of those come out just to come to my shop. Some come to shop at my store and also to spend a day in the town. We have a really nice little cafe that's open over the noon hour. We have some other nice shops that have gift type items, and we have a nice clothing store. So there
Swedish groceries.
Swedish groceries at the grocery store, yes. So we have quite a bit of things within the town to recommend it to the average person who wants to come through. So there are people who make a day of it. They say, oh, well, I want to get yarn, but I'm also going to make a day of it and do other fun things. And then there are the people who come and get yarn from me when they're traveling through. They know, since I'm right on Highway 81 and I'm not too far from the interstate, they know I'm here, and maybe they're traveling from Kansas to South Dakota, and Highway 81 is very convenient, so Stromsburg's their halfway point where they stop and rest a little bit, do some yarn shopping, and then continue on. Or same way for people who travel across the state, west to east or east to west. I become a stopping point then.
Sounds fun.
Online sales, my furthest away sales so far have been from Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in sales, how much would you say is in your store versus online?
I would say it's about 50-50 for what I sell online versus in store. And that varies from month to month. Some months I'll get way more people in the store and very few sales online. And then sometimes it's exactly the opposite. I'll have very few people come through the store, but a lot of sales online. It varies.
I've noticed in recent years a number of yarn stores closing or moving to larger populated places. So what does it take these days to be a successful yarn store?
You have to stay on top of the trends. And you can't just keep everything the same in your store. It's easy to slip into a rut and be like, oh, I've always had this yarn, and but you have to get the new yarns in. It's good to keep the old yarns in, especially if they've been a good seller or if they're a very versatile yarn. There's some yarns that I have that, as long as they are being made, I will keep them. Brown Sheep Lanaloft is a fantastic yarn. You can use it for so many different projects. It's a good price. People like it. It's going to stay here as long as Brown Sheep is in existence. But then, sometimes you get the trends with the novelty yarns, and it's good to jump on the bandwagon and get the novelty yarns, but don't overstock on the novelty yarns.
You'll be stuck with them.
You'll be stuck with them for a very long time. But, so you have to stay on top of the trends. A thing I like to do is to put up models in my store. I have different scarves and hats and shawls.
There's a hat right behind you.
Yeah, there's a hat
Oh, you're
right
blocking it.
behind me.
There you go.
Here it is. And, this is kind of the slouchy style hat. It doesn't have an extreme slouch. But this is the kind of shape of a hat that people like right now. And this is a very easy project. It takes one ball of yarn. Even very beginner people who can only do knit and purl stitch can do this hat. So you have to have beginner level projects around for the beginner people so that, oh, well, I can do this. But then you should have some other things around, or I try to keep other projects around that are a little bit more advanced for the people who want to stretch and try something new or make a new project. And it's important to switch out those, I call them models, fairly often. Some of them stay around longer than others. If it's really popular and people are still making it, I keep it because it's, especially the more classic ones. But then there are some things that are a little more trendy. They don't stay around or as long. And then there are some that only stay for about 6 months because I have a model knitters program where some people that I know to be good knitters and responsible people, I send them yarn, they knit an item for my store, I keep it on display for 6 months, and then I send it back to them so that they can then enjoy the item that they put all those hours of knitting into. Because I don't have time to knit all the things I want to have on display in the store.
I can relate.
Yes. And also, it's really valuable because a lot of times I let them choose the pattern or the project. So then it's not just items that are my taste. I say, okay, well, what would you want to knit? Or I'll say, well, I've got this yarn, what would you make out of it? And that's a good thing because they might look at the same yarn a little differently than I do.
True. Very true. Okay. Well, sometimes people get this idea that they want to open a yarn store. And I think most of the time it's people who just think that they can sit and knit all day and make a living.
Oh, yeah.
But if someone was seriously considering starting a yarn store these days, what advice would you give them?
The first advice I would get would be to get some sort of accounting software and learn how to use it. A lot of business plans and sample business plans out there say to get an accountant. If you can afford an accountant, get an accountant, but accountants can be kind of expensive. So QuickBooks has a lot of nice software programs of varying levels for small business owners.
And you have a much better grasp of what's happening in your business if you on
know
top
the
of that
numbers.
yourself. Yeah.
You should always know your numbers. You should know what you can afford when you get new yarn in. And also, pay attention to the trends. And pay attention to what people in your area actually like. I had a yarn sales rep in today, and she showed me some yarns that were just awesome, but I turned them down because I knew that those aren't quite the perfect fit for my town. I think they're crazy awesome yarns, or ridiculous, and they're probably a little too ridiculous for the area. Or, you know I would see a yarn and say, oh, I know these 3 people that would like this, but
only those 3.
Only those 3. So, I mean, it's not a bad thing to get something that only a few people like, but maybe get a smaller quantity of that. And if you're planning to open a yarn shop, don't be afraid to start small. I started with $500. I was graduating from college, and I had an extra $500 in my savings account. And I said, okay, I'm going to start a yarn shop. So I got a website set up, and with the website and the domain name and business email, I got a dedicated business email right from the beginning. That was kelsey@spindleshuttleandneedle.com. It took me about a week to settle on my name. But having a dedicated business email makes everything sound and look so much more professional. And then you can also ignore that email after your closing hours for the evening, and then bother with it again in the morning. So, and then with the rest of the $500, so at that point I had about $400 that I put into inventory. $400 is a very small amount of inventory. It is a very small amount. And so for the first year, every time I sold something, I just put all my profit back into expanding inventory, 100%. And then as I grew, I still put a lot of the profit back into expanding. But, for my first 2 years, I never went into the red. I didn't really make a good profit for myself to pay myself, but I didn't either go into debt. And I think that's a good way. And starting small is helpful because you don't get overwhelmed. If you try to start big as a full-fledged yarn shop, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed. They didn't realize there's going to be so many bills to keep track of and so many things to keep track of on the website. And it's like when you learn to juggle, you start by tossing one ball back and forth. You don't start with 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, not that I can juggle, but...
Yeah, I know of a yarn shop that was their story. Mm-hmm. They opened very big, now they're closed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you could maybe open really big if you already had like a business degree, or if you'd run other businesses successfully in the past.
Mm-hmm. And if you could sustain that level of inventory for longer periods of time before you are profitable.
Yeah.
It would take you longer to be profitable with a, say, 3 times the size of what you have now.
Yeah, it would be. And, don't be afraid if something isn't selling to throw it on the clearance rack and not get it again. And, I mean, there are certain things that don't sell very quickly that you kind of just got to keep on the shelves when you're a yarn shop, like basic stitch markers. You're not going to make your store profit line on stitch markers generally. But you should keep those so that when a customer comes in and they go, oh, I'm getting all this yarn. Oh, wait, I think I have lost all my stitch markers. Then there's one that you have packaged right there that they can pick up.
It's an add-on.
It's an add-on.
Yeah. Whatever you want to say.
I don't know what I want to say.
Your favorite yarns.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite yarns, and I have done a lot of projects with this. This is Araucania Huasco, and it is made in Chile by Araucania Yarn Company. And it is 100% merino, and it's a fingering weight, and has 450 yards on a skein, on a 100-gram skein. So you get a lot of yardage, which means you can make pretty nice sized projects with just one skein. It's $24.95 a skein. But when you can make an entire cowl or a small shawl out of one skein, that actually turns out into quite an economical project. And it's got the hand paint colors like this, and then it's also got the tonal colors, which are kettle dyed, so that you get different shades of the same color on it. So you can get different effects, like this one, which I made with 2 colors. The green is a tonal, which overall you get the effect of a solid, but you can see there's a little bit of shifting in the hue, or in the shading, I guess. So it doesn't just look like a boring flat. There's depth. And then this variegated was this color. And a lot of times if you're doing a project and you love a variegated yarn, variegateds can be very overwhelming on their own. You just end up looking like an entire giant blotchy thing. But you pair it, like this one, where you've got stripes with the variegated and the solid, it's much less overwhelming, and the bright green pulls out the green in the variegated, and it's very nice. So, this is probably one of my top selling yarns, and it is, I have done so many projects in this Huasco that it's not even funny anymore, but it's one of my go-to yarns, because it's very soft, it's very nice around the neck, and you can get a lot out of one skein. One of my other favorite yarns, and this is probably actually the #1 bestseller of all time in my shop. It is one of the first yarns that I started carrying when I first opened, and it is the Brown Sheep Lanaloft. And it is made by the Brown Sheep Company in Mitchell, Nebraska, and I carry the worsted weight. It also comes in a sport weight and a bulky weight, but I carry the worsted weight because that's the most versatile for me. And bulky gets a bit heavy. So it is in a 3.5 ounce skein, or 100 grams. It has about 160 yards in a skein. And it comes in 3 different types of colors, or at least that I carry in my store. You have the solids, and some of the solids are a little bit heathered, so you have a little bit of depth of color there. But overall, you're going to have a solid color effect when you knit. And then there are the what they call the monochromes, or what I would call a tonal, which are kind of kettle dyed so that you get different shades of the same color on the same skein. And this is going to have a little bit of a blotchy effect when you work with it, but not, it'll all be different shades of the same color, so it's not going to be overwhelming. And then they have their hand paints. Their hand paints are actually rather famous. A lot of people really like their hand paints. They come up with their own colorways there. And they paint the skeins with different shades, so you have a standard variegated yarn. And being hand dyed, they do vary from dye lot to dye lot, so if you would order some from me, get enough all at once. If you need 6, because you can see I only carry 3 of each normally, I'll order in 6 for you of the same dye lot and make sure it all comes so it all matches for you. And that's not a problem to order things in. And I've got actually a couple of projects that I or other people have done. I did this hat. This is the Norway hat. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. And it has a special stitch structure to it. It's knit that really breaks up variegated yarns. So a lot of times when you work with variegated, you'll get what's called pooling, where, especially if you're knitting in the round, every time you come around, your yellow stacks up on top of your yellow, and your blue stacks up on top of your blue, and your red stacks up on top of your red, and then you've got like vertical stripes or great big blobs of color, which can be a very cool effect. But not everyone likes that. So this pattern, since you actually knit into stitches from the previous row and pull loops up, it really breaks it up. So you get a very nice mottled effect of all the different colors, and it kind of looks like small jewels all over. And this one is a very famous pattern. It is the Bobble hat, which was the hat released for Shetland Wool Week in, I think in 2015. It was the Shetland Wool Week pattern. And it is a paid pattern on Ravelry. I think it's about $6 or $8 to get this pattern. And you can see this was knit by one of my customers, and she's letting me have it in the store for the foreseeable future. We used one of the solid, or some of the solid Brown Sheep Lanaloft for this section, but we used one of the variegateds for the top in the color Twilight, something Twilight. Yeah, twilight. And since this is the sky and it's supposed to look like a stormy day where it's starting to snow, we've got the blue, we've got the gray, we've got the brown. It's really pretty. I really like her color choice there. So, that is Brown Sheep Line On. So, another one of my favorite yarns, and probably the one that's actually closest to my heart, is this yarn, which is our Blue River Icelandic Lopi. I mentioned earlier that my family ended up getting sheep. Well, we got Icelandic sheep. And Icelandic sheep are a primitive breed. They're basically the same as when the Vikings brought them to Iceland around the year 1000. So they still have a dual coat where they have the long hairy outer coat called the tog and the downy soft inner coat called the thel. And traditionally the Vikings separated those. They would use the tog to make sails and sacks and things that needed to be really strong and rough wearing. And then they would use the thel for next to the skin and clothing because it's downy and soft. It can even approach the same micron size as like ultrafine merino. It's really soft. But somewhere along the line, they discovered that you can, I don't think the Vikings did, I think the Icelanders did later, that you can spin both together as a single. And what happens is that the tog, being much longer than the thel, will actually migrate towards the middle while the downy soft fibers kind of get wrapped around the outside. This is not 100% that it does this, but generally that will happen. So you have basically a core of really strong tog, which is hairy, and then all that downy fuzziness is wrapped around the outside, and they call that yarn Lopi. And so we've been having our yarn, or we send our wool to the mill every year now and have it made into Lopi, which is a really good seller.
You use the Shepherd's Mill, right?
We used Shepherd's Mill this year. Previous year we used Morningstar Mill out in North Carolina. Both mills do a fantastic
Last
job.
week's episode had the Shepherd's Mill in it.
Oh, Shepherd's Mill is really fun. And that's the only mill I've been to. We, of course, did not drive our fleeces out to Morningstar, and that is a large part of why we ended up bringing our stuff to the Shepherd's Mill, because we could hand deliver our fleeces and talk with the people about what we wanted exactly. And Sally, being very knowledgeable about yarn and fiber arts, knew exactly what we were trying to go for and produced lovely, lovely yarn. This is some that she spun. And so we have 100 gram skeins of the Lopi, and we have it mostly in the natural colors of the sheep, because Icelandic sheep come in different colors because they're primitive. The most prevalent color is white. So we have the most white sheep, we have the most white yarn. But they also come in natural black, and they also come in gray, and they also come in a color called morit, which is a brown. And we don't have very many morit sheep. So we had the morit blended with some of the gray fleeces. So we have a morit gray, and it's this very light, soft brown color. It's just lovely. It's just yummy. And then we dye some of the white too into kind of natural earthy colors to mimic natural dyes that the Vikings had. So we have the green, we have the pale lavender, we have the soft pink, we have the golden yellow, we have the woad blue, and we have kind of a more bright burgundy red. So, and we dye those in batches of 4. We can do 4 at a time. So we can get very close to the same color, especially if we do several batches in a day, by measuring and being very scientific with our dyeing process. But the 4 that we do together are going to match the best.
And you dye them yourself?
We dye them ourselves.
Okay.
My mom and I both do the dyeing, but she's been doing most of the dyeing of the Icelandic lately. And these skeins are 100 yards, and they're about 4.2 ounces, give or take. And it's supposed to take a size 8 to 10 needle. And the undyed retails the natural colors for $27.95, and then the dyed is $29.95. And this is grown on our own farm just outside of Stromsburg, on our own sheep, and we're very involved in every step of the process.
And their guard llama came from me.
Yes, we have a guard llama, and his name is Liam. And he came from Tashia, and he's finally starting to warm up to me. For a long time, I think he had a pretty extreme case of stranger danger, but I've discovered he likes fresh green pasture grass. So, we only just a few days ago let our flock out into pasture. But, so before we were letting the flock out into pasture, I'd go get a handful and bring it to him, and he'd be very happy about that. So now he comes right up to the fence wondering if I've got another treat for him. Another thing I do a lot of is I dye wool top. And a lot of people call this roving. And roving is not like super wrong. It is often called roving online. It is called roving by Etsy. But the technical difference between top and roving is that roving is a carded process and top is a combed process. Top is a combed process. So when you card, you have a big drum carder and it gets pulled off and all the fibers are kind of more or less aligned, but they're also kind of going higgledy-piggledy all over the place. Where with comb top, it is combed, so all the fibers are perfectly aligned. And comb top is often quite a bit thicker than roving. Roving is usually really thin and kind of, you hold up a strip of it and you can see through it. Top is very thick. You can see this is one strand of top. It's like someone's ponytail. So, one of the reasons that I dye top rather than roving is because since it's thicker, it holds together better, so I can lay it out on a table and paint it. And painting roving is one of my favorite things to do. And I do this out in my dad's machine shed right now because I got really tired of doing this in my kitchen and spilling dye on the floor. It doesn't matter if I spill it on the rock floor of his machine shed. And eventually I'm going to have a dye studio or dye shack where I can keep my stuff up all the time. But right now I dye seasonally when it's warm weather outside. And I really like playing with all the colors. I like to look at inspiration photos. This one came from an inspiration photo where it was a really dark stormy cloud with red light poking around it, and it's called Red at Morning. And then sometimes I just look at a color wheel, or because I know my dyes, because I've done it quite a while, I know which dyes will look good together, and like these I know that these colors will blend into each other well, and so that's how I did that one. But sometimes I just spray the colors on, or squirt the colors on, and they wait to see how they come out. And it can be a lot of fun. And most of my top that I dye is a Colombian and Rambouillet wool blend. And it comes from the Brown Sheep Company out of Mitchell, Nebraska. So it comes from sheep that are grown in western Nebraska and Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, South Dakota, that area. So most of this is U.S. grown. And it hasn't traveled very far to come to me to become my dyed top. I do have a few other fiber blends though. This is Polwarth, 21 to 24 micron. It's very fine. Polwarth is a breed of sheep that you mostly find down in Australia. And a Polwarth sheep is 3/4 merino and 1/4 another breed of sheep, which I can never remember. I also have merino and silk, and you can see the shininess in it from the silk. And of course, you know what merino is, or most of you probably know what it is. A very large breed of sheep that has super fine, very soft wool. I also have, this is one of my new fibers that I've been dyeing, a 50-50 alpaca and silk blend, which is very, very slippery to work with. Not like for spinning, but for dyeing purposes. But it's really fun, and it's really pretty. It's very shiny, very, very soft. I'm probably going to keep this in the store, even though it's kind of a pain to dye, because it is just so awesome as a finished product. Since I dye roving, I also dye yarn, because I had a lot of people coming into my store and saying, "Oh, you're roving. technically top. Your roving is so beautiful. I wish that I could buy that in yarn form because I don't spin. And I said, well, that's a really good idea. So last spring I started to dye yarn. And I have some sock yarn in the store that I've dyed and done in some of the painted colors. But then I've also started doing some kettle dyeing. And this is on Brown Sheep Lamb's Pride base. So it's 85% wool, 15% mohair. And it's kettle dyed because I put this down into a roaster or a crock pot or some other container, like a kettle. And I pour my dye over the yarn and let it cook. And I have to be careful not to stir it during that whole time. It takes about 45 minutes to cook. And when you kettle dye, you get a lot of the colors kind of running into each other. So you get the gold blending into the green. You get the browns blending into the green. We have all the plums and the berries and the purples that blend together, but then there's still different sections that are distinctly the colors that I put on. Like here's the lavender and here's the green. And then here's the in-between colors where we have kind of the earthy purple. So I've been having a lot of fun with that. And all of my hand-dyed yarn and my hand-dyed top you can find on Etsy, on my Etsy shop. I do put these on my website also, but I usually keep the Etsy shop up a little bit more to date because people who are browsing and searching for dyed top or dyed yarn anymore, they mostly tend to go to Etsy first to look. So it's easier for me to reach the people who want my yarn there.
If you're interested in getting any of Kelsey's products, you can buy them on her website at spindleshuttleneedle.com and also in her Etsy store, which is called Heddles and Treadles. She's also given a coupon code for the viewers of this podcast to be able to use on her website and in her Etsy shop. So the coupon code is right here. Also down in the show notes if you want to refer to it down there. But go check out her stuff. And now we're going to switch on over to TB strings and things because I want to show you what I bought at her place. First up is my very first braid. Okay, you might have noticed my nails are not so great this week. I've been cleaning house for visiting family that's coming in a couple days. So, yeah, they're all in not so good condition. But this is the very first braid that I ever bought myself. And Kelsey was also the one at the Mid-Plains Fiber Fair that I bought my drop spindle from. And it came with 4 ounces of roving, which was just, actually it's the same stuff as this, it's just that this is dyed. And I don't know how long I stood in front of that wall of top roving and I had to decide what I wanted. Pretty much the whole time I was there, I was trying to decide which one I wanted because I knew going there this is something I wanted to buy. So I decided on this one because as a beginner spinner, I didn't want to think too hard about color. And this one being a marbled color effect that whenever the color came about in the roving, it is what it is. There's a lot of things you can do with color blocking and gradients and things like that. And I'm just not ready to think that hard about it. So I got this one and it is called Purple Iris and it's made of Colombian and Ramule wool. I think I told you in the first episode that this year I wanted to do some color work projects, knitting color work, because I have not done that yet. Of course I've done it in crochet, but not knitting. And if any of you are familiar with Ellie of Skin Deer Knits, her thing is color work. She came up with a mitten design that's really good for those of us who are giving color work a try for the first time. So I knew that I wanted to do those mittens and I went to Kelsey's shop wanting to buy some yarn just for that. So let me show you what I have. I bought 4 little skeins The color is kind of weird. This dark one right here is actually dark green. I don't know what color is coming out there on my screen right now. It does not look green, but in real life it's green. So obviously I got 2 white and 1 red. I wanted to get these 2 for the Sail Blue mittens, and these were on sale, so I just got 2 more to get 2 more. If I like the Sail Blue mittens, maybe I'm going to make another pair in green and white or something or other. But what I got was the Lanaloft, which is Brown Sheep Company Lanaloft. You can see their logo is over here, Brown Sheep Company. And as you probably already figured out, Brown Sheep Company is a Nebraska-based company. They've been here for a long, long time. And actually, the very first project I ever did with natural fibers was a Brown Sheep Company yarn. It wasn't the Lanaloft, it was something else. But Brown Sheep Company has a special place in my heart because of that. It was, you know, opened up a whole new world for me of natural fibers. And so I am excited to be able to work with their stuff again and make Sail Blue mittens. My final acquisition from Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle was a book. Needle Travel. It is the Fiber and Fabric Travel Guide. I was aware of this before, I just never owned one. And throughout here, it's broken down by state. Oh, that's ads. And they list stores for those that carry fiber and fabric. So here's how it works. This is my state. And every place you see a dot is a store. Focus? There we go. There's a focus. Yeah. And you can see Stromsburg right there. Right by York, which is where a fiber fair was. So as you're traveling, maybe this summer, some other time, you can always refer to this book and see if there is a shop near you that would carry stuff that you're interested in getting. And then it's alphabetically listed here by city. And next to the name of each store, it tells you if they carry stuff for quilting yarn, needlepoint weaving, spinning, cross stitch, or embroidery. So you can go through here, and in my state, a lot of shops are quilt shops. I don't do anything with that, so it wouldn't matter to me. I'm just interested in yarn and spinning. And those are the places that I would go to. So I am excited about this. Kelsey says there's also an app that goes with this book, and as you're traveling around, if you come within a certain radius, which you can set in the app, distance away, it'll tell you, it'll notify you that you're near such and such a store and that you might be interested in going there. Maybe you've noticed by now I'm more of a project-based buyer. I have something in mind and then I buy for it. I'm not someone who just buys a skein just to have it and then figure out later what I can do with it. Part of that is because I've been a crocheter for so long, and with crochet that's just not a wise thing to do. But also, if I just bought skeins because they were pretty, I would have far, far too many. So I choose to be project-based, and maybe eventually, like when I have more money to spend, I can kind of swing more towards having beautiful skeins to have beautiful skeins. But for now, I am project-based, and I have an idea of what I'm going to do with all the yarn that I have. I have a couple of works in progress to show you this week. Let's start with my baby cocoon that I've been working on, because I did feature that last week. Let me show you what I've done so far. So what we have figured out, we being the owners, the parents of, oh my goodness, the people I'm making this for, which, okay, I mentioned before, I mentioned in the podcast, didn't I, that I need to make this bigger than what the pattern was originally written for. So I made it as long as it needs to be. Okay, so this is a part you've already seen last time, and I had to make it longer. See that? Longer? And it's still on the needles. So what happened was, where can I see it here? So in order for me to extend it, I actually had to knit the opposite direction than what I had before. And it did create a kind of a funky line. Is that it? Yeah, let me show you this. See this line across here? You can tell where the knit stitches are now going the opposite way. So it did create one row of kind of funky looking stitches. We'll see if that comes out in blocking. I really don't know. But I did try to do the rest of this on the knitting machine, but the cables were going the opposite direction than what I was doing before, and the stitches were stretched so much that I couldn't get the carriage across on those cable rows. So I had to put on needles and do it by hand, which was fine. So now I'm ready to widen it. I realized once it was lengthened that proportionally it looked pretty funny and that I needed to widen it. So the math works out pretty nicely that these blocks here in between the cables, if I put this block on either side, that it will come out proportionally the width that I need it to be compared to the length that I have had to make it. So that is the next thing to do, and I'm going to do that on the machine because it'll be easy to put it on there, probably from, well, one direction or that. I'll figure out which direction. I'll put it on there and put the edge stitch on the needle, do a row, keep adding this so I join it nicely, and that should go really fast because I'm not having to reform any stitches. So I'll do those panels, I guess we'll call them panels, blocks down the sides to widen it, and then I can do the back panel. Oh, that was your panel. I'll do the back panel after that. And now, some of you might have seen that I started my Afterthought Everything sock. Okay, I haven't gotten too far with it, but this is another new experience for me. So here's what I have so far. And this is the first time that I am making socks out of fingering weight yarn. So it's the first time I'm using needles this size. It's a size 0. And it's the first time I'm doing magic loop. It's taken me a little bit to kind of get used to it, but I think I've gotten the groove where I'm not having to think too hard, and it helps that I have a little more to my sock. Of course, you get past a certain point and that part's a lot easier. But I'm really enjoying this yarn. This is something I've had in my stash for years. Okay, one of the exceptions from what I was saying earlier, this is one of the yarns that I bought just because I thought it was so pretty and I had no project in mind. So this is 3 Irish Girls, I want to say Liam colorway. I can't tell you if it's still available or not. I didn't even look, but I did get this a number of years ago. And yeah, so see all the colors in there. Let's turn it. See all that? Blues, greens, browns, and that it is working up. So pretty. So these are my Afterthought Everything socks, and the pattern does call for 4-inch rib, and I don't think I want to do it that long. I was like, why? I'm sure the designer had a reason that, oh, she just kind of like that. And I looked at it in the picture and I was like, do I want that look? I don't think so. I think I'm just far enough in my rib that I'm just going to do it this way and continue on. And I'm just doing vanilla socks, just something very simple. Not ready to get too crazy with my socks yet. Vanilla is just fine for me right now, especially with this colorway. I think vanilla, it'll look great. It'll really show off everything. So that's my plan. And that also does it for this episode of the Butterfield Alpacas and Fiber Arts podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember to hop on over to the Ravelry group and check in with the KAL. Tell us what you want to make and what yarn you're going to use. If you have any questions about the KAL, also post them over there, and I will see you on the next episode.